for attending our webinar today, City Government in a State of Crisis. I wanted to kind of let you know from the beginning that if you have any technical difficulties and are experiencing any problems getting on the webinar or hearing, seeing, maybe a blessing for you if you can't see us, but go ahead and let Soraya know in the chat. But if you have any questions for Chris and I, please use the question and answer box. The reason we ask for that is as we go through this, if we can't get to all of the questions, that's the only box where we actually have a record of the questions asked. So we can follow up with you and make sure that we've answered all the questions. That being said, with me today is Chris Johnson. He is the municipal law attorney at Kentucky League of Cities. And we're just going to go ahead, and I know that people will be logging on, but we're just going to go ahead and start. Chris, do you want to kind of lead off?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the new normal, at least the new normal for the foreseeable future, unfortunately, given the COVID-19 issues we're all dealing with. And we've kind of come through the first, this is our fourth week of teleworking at KLC, and we've kind of come through the first bit of shock to where, our city officials, and believe you me, I see a lot of familiar names on the attendees today because I think I've spoken with about all of you at one time or another by email or by phone. And the first week or so, it was, okay, we've got a regular meeting coming up. What do we do? At KLC and KCO's behest, we got some good guidance from the Attorney General's office as to the ability to do video teleconferencing remotely, whereas in the past, by statute, still required by statute, you needed to have a central location noted on the notice to where you could still have attendees show up. But we got some guidance from the Attorney General that allowed for remote video teleconferencing, and then about a week or so later, and it's amazing. I was looking at just the calls over 3 weeks, and I was going back and looking at some of the conversations I had with city officials just from 2 weeks ago, and it reads like ancient Roman history at this point. I was like, oh yeah, that did happen. We were doing that 2 weeks ago. So the comparison I make, and I know it's driving some people crazy because I continue to make it, is we're flying the plane as we're putting it together at this point. So everything we're doing is subject to change. But sort of my intention in talking as of now, as of 2:03 p.m. on April 9th, 2020, and as part of that, I want to wish everyone happy Easter, which is upcoming, and happy Passover. And Passover, I think, for historical and religious reasons, has an added meaning this year, given the nature of Passover and how it came to be. So I just wanted to wish you all happy returns on that as well. But I wanted to kind of go over Senate Bill 150 that the governor signed into law, and after it was signed into law on March 30th, on March 31st, Attorney General Cameron sort of gave an advisory, he did give an advisory opinion as to some of the provisions of that. And the two key aspects of this are the provisions under open records, which obviously we've got a lot of cities that have either closed City Hall completely or working on a skeleton crew, and open meetings, sort of how that can work going forward. Because in speaking to a lot of the city officials, it's becoming more and more apparent that okay, we may have canceled a regular meeting or we may have postponed some meetings, but the business of city government never rests, and there's some issues that with budget season coming up, we're in budget season, but there are issues that the city has to address that we need to look at. So the big thing as far as open records that came down was, as we all know, because you've been to enough KLC trainings, that when you receive an open records request, you've got 3 days to respond to it. Now, obviously, if you only have somebody in City Hall once a week, that became pretty unworkable. And although I think in most every case, it's not uncommon for cities to prepare copies or mail copies after being paid that whopping 10 cents a page we can get for that. The default under the statute is in-person review of the documents. Obviously, with the epidemic we're living through at this point, the pandemic we're living through, in-person review is unworkable. It's just, you can't do it. So with that in mind, the Senate Bill 150 that was signed into law and under the advisory opinion given by the AG is pretty straightforward. And what the law states now is, for the duration of this crisis, upon receipt of an open records request, you're going to have 10 days to respond to it. You're going to have 10 days to get the records out, or you're going to have a really good showing as to why you can't get them. And frankly, in working with your city attorney, if you're working remotely and you've got a file that is, hidden in the deepest, darkest recesses of City Hall and you just can't get it, I think you might have a pretty good argument that, it may take a week or two to get the copies of that out. So that's something. But, and again, because these bills were drafted in pretty quick order, in the past, the 3 days response did not include weekends or holidays. The way Senate Bill 150 was drafted and signed into law, it states 10 days. So whereas in the past, you would not have counted the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, or any holiday in that calculation, the Attorney General's advisory opinion states that because how the bill was drafted, you've got 10 days to respond. Obviously, and I know this because I was an appellate attorney for longer than I care to remember, and practiced as a trial attorney, that anytime you have a deadline that falls on Saturday or Sunday or a holiday, it rolls to that next date. So that's still in place, and the advisory opinion states that as well. Moving on to your meetings, because we're getting to where we're going to have to start meeting, conducting business. We will have, you still have the option of video or audio. There is a preference for video over audio in the statute or in the language that allows for during this emergency. And I've spoken to several cities that, as a result of this pandemic, have gone out and purchased iPads for their cities. Setting aside the potential open records nightmares that could arise from that, because if your city has done that, KLC, we have a model sort of acknowledgement as to not just that you're receiving city property, but in all likelihood, anything you're doing on that, you need to think of it's just a very large iPhone at that point, and it's a phone. So any message, any email, anything they're doing on that, if it's paid with city funds, is going to be subject to open records. And there have been some, I'll say, interesting cases having to do with some, mayors that were texting girlfriends that weren't necessarily their wives that have come to light, and it can be problematic. But if you have done that, the preference, you're going to have a hard time showing under the guidance from the Attorney General that you can't do a video conference in that situation. So that's the initial aspect of it. If you have the technological ability to do it, the default is going to be doing the video conferencing. Now, having said that, if you have, you look at the average age of most of our elected officials, and they're 65 years of age or older. And I'll fully admit, the first Microsoft Teams meetings we had at KLC, it took me 2 hours to figure out how to use it. And depending on geographical location, if you're in some portions of Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, even Central Kentucky, you may not have the bandwidth, or if that's even the right term. I don't even know. I'm not that kind of internet kind of person, but you may not have the ability to have the video chat or the video conferencing with that. If that's the case, then you do now have, under the statute, the ability to, during this emergency, to have a phone conference. In both of these situations, especially if you're having a phone conference over a video conference, I think it's incumbent at the outset of your meeting to where you get a record, because we all know we have that one citizen who will, if they don't already file weekly open records or open meetings complaints with the Attorney General, especially if they're housebound during this and have nothing better to do, they're probably just waiting to file something against the city. So I do think it's incumbent upon you all at the start of that meeting, be it by phone or by video, that you get on the record as to why you have the ability to do this. But especially if you're doing it by phone conference as opposed to video conference, I do think you need to get in the minutes as to why you had to do it as a phone conference as opposed to a video conference. As far as procedurally how this does, it's just you notice it the same way as a special meeting. You would just note, the only difference would be that if you're doing a video conference with this, you would note how you're doing the video conference, and you need to have a means by which the community as a whole or your media can tune in and see that. I know that Mayor Dearth was talking that I think for J-Town's meeting from a night or two ago, they were doing it via Zoom, but they may have had a camera set up to where it was filming the Zoom to go out on Facebook Live. But you need to have some manner by which your citizens can observe that. I'll add to this that if you normally do allow for public input, that's great, but this may be a time to where until we can, until you kind of get your feet wet and figure out how it's going to work, first couple of meetings, you probably are not going to want to throw it open for public comment because it could get pretty unwieldy in a hurry with that. One of the other issues under the advisory opinion that the AG pointed out, which, and if you've spoken to me on special meetings, always harp on this, is that if you notice a special meeting, you have to have that agenda pretty much, you've got to have a lot of meat on the bones. You can't just say old business, new business, what have you. You've got to know what you're going to be talking about, and you're going to have that, if you know you're going to have the second reading of this ordinance, you need to have that on the agenda. One thing that the Attorney General Cameron's office came out and said was that if this video or phone meeting is a regular meeting, you do have a little bit of leeway in taking up items that may not necessarily be expressly noted on the agenda. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room there, but I think common sense, and again, anybody who's ever spoken to me, I believe, it's a heck of a lot better to have something and not need it than need it, not have it. I still think you want to flesh out what your agenda is for a regular meeting that you're noticing in this manner as best you can. But if you are having a regular meeting, I do think you have a little bit of leeway with that. Other than that, I'm trying to look at my notes here to see if there's anything else. But generally, as far as that, that you're going to be following the special meeting requirements for the most part. And I'm trying to get through that pretty fast. I'm sure I probably left one or two things out. Morgan, if I have, please feel free to add it in.
So the only other things that I would mention, and this would be particular to commissions or committees, is that our previous guidance was to defer to the video teleconferencing and audio. The good news for planning and zoning and for code enforcement is that Senate Bill 150 includes a hard statement that during the pendency of the state of emergency, any of the deadlines in planning and zoning or code enforcement that would require hearings of any kind are suspended. So if you have a matter that's in front of your planning and zoning commission or your board of adjustments, what have you right now, that deadline is told as of the effective date of Senate Bill 150. Anything that would require an in-person violation or an in-person meeting is told. Now, if cities are able to have a planning and zoning commission meeting, board of adjustments meeting, code enforcement meeting by video teleconference, there are provisions available in that statute for those hearings, or in that legislation for those hearings. What that means is even if the Planning and Zoning Commission or a committee themselves could meet by audio teleconference, if the video teleconference is not an option, you cannot conduct hearings by audio teleconference. The statute recognizes that for testimonial purposes, for any hearing or any meeting that would require testimonial evidence of any kind, that has to be conducted by video teleconference, and all parties involved have to be able to see and hear one another in real time. If those conditions can be met, the hearings can be conducted and those persons will be considered to be in the same room or, to meet any requirements. The other aspect is any order or legal document that requires the signature of all parties can be signed in pieces and taken as signed in one piece as a whole. Meaning, if I'm on the Board of Adjustments and we're getting ready to issue an order, I can sign it at my house, scan it or take a picture, email it to somebody else. They can sign a separate document at their house, and we can combine all documents and they can be considered one legally binding document. So those are some other aspects of Senate Bill 150 that we are eager, excited for cities to be able to utilize.
I do want to mention one thing I did forget to mention with this is the default under open meeting still applies, that just because you may be using Zoom or using a phone call in, the same way you can't require someone to give their name and identify themselves to attend an in-person meeting, that still applies for if they're remotely accessing it via Zoom or via phone. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And that kind of goes back to, as far as the workability, as far as having public comments, but the rule would still apply that, if you are having public comments, you can ask that they identify themselves. But until we kind of get this figured out, how this is going to work, I still think the default may be to strongly consider as to whether or not you want to sort of open that Pandora's box as far as having, 70 people on a Zoom call all trying to chime in at one time. So maybe want to keep some control of that at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And also all other requirements of open meetings are required. So you're going to have to keep taking minutes. You're going to have to make sure that any official action is documented, that it's by a roll call vote, that those minutes are recorded and approved. And I even had one question today from a city asking if, for preliminary motions like approval of minutes or what have you, generally cities will somebody will make a motion, everybody at the same time kind of says aye or nay, and the motions are approved and passed. They were asking in Zoom, does that require an aye vote or a roll call vote? That may be the easiest way for a lot of cities to approach that. It's really up to you whether you want to fall back on Robert's Rules of Order and use the anonymous, the consent kind of process, but I'm going to leave that up to you and your city attorneys to kind of figure out. So I'm going to start in on the questions. The first one is from Mayor Thomas. Good afternoon, Morgan and Chris. What are most cities doing as far as deadlines on occupational withholding taxes due and also restaurant taxes? We've received a couple of calls. I think most cities will move the deadline to July 15th, but if everyone waits until then to pay their withholdings, we will not have the funds to pay the final quarter bills. And a lot of cities are postponing to align the current calendar with the federal calendar and the state calendar and how that's been moved forward. Quite honestly, if your city can do that and that's something fiscally that you can afford to do, we have the executive orders on our website. I think that may be the preferable way to have the hard numbers when they're due, because you're not going to have any of the income tax filings until then. Chris, do you have anything to really add to that?
I mean, this is one area to where a city is going to have to kind of figure out what makes the most sense. Actually, Morgan and I have spoken to a city about a week or two ago that was talking about the restaurant withholdings with that, and the take from that city was, listen, they're already supposedly withholding that, and currently ongoing. That's does it make sense? And frankly, we defaulted to them. We're like, listen, you all know what you need to do. There is a lot of logical sense to be made from keeping everything in as much as alignment as can be under the new allowance that has been passed. But I can tell you, this is becoming a real issue, the revenue aspect of it for our cities. I had a conversation with the city yesterday that was looking to get, like a better way of putting it, a bridge loan, that they're having trouble, being able to make payments that they need to be making. So they're having to talk to some banks. It's a real situation. So my take on it is that yes, it makes a lot of sense to kind of keep everything in line as best you can, but at the end of the day, that each city is going to have to determine what makes the most sense for them as far as how to collect those funds and what absolutely needs to get paid when it needs to get paid, and if you can stretch it out until then.
Okay, and this is a question that came up from council member, and I've never asked him how to pronounce his name, from Prospect Hulsman. I'm sorry, I guarantee you I butchered that. I've spoken to you many times. He said some may be concerned about using Zoom video teleconferencing because of recent negative news articles about them. Just read one yesterday about kids video teleconferencing with their school. It appears to me that the problems fall into two categories. One, privacy related, such that others might be able to chime in, and Zoom bombing, which I believe I understand correctly is people interacting with their own audio or visual. That is a very polite way of you saying that. As these really, are these really deterrents to Zoom? And of course, it would be best if these problems weren't there. Anyway, Chris, do you want to? We've talked about this in-house, so.
Well, I mean, we're using Zoom right now, so I'll knock on wood that we have nothing untoward happen. Those are valid concerns, but again, I said we're flying the plane as we're building at this point. The biggest, I guess, warning I can put out there is any type of technology a city is using, you get what you pay for, and I can guarantee you that if you look to save money because something is free, it's not free, and chances are any company that does this and they're doing it for free, where they're making their money is information on the user. So if it's some free sort of be it a phone conference that's internet related, or a Zoom Lite, or and especially if it has like a Russian name or something in it, you need to be cognizant that nothing's free, especially when it comes to technology. And you look at what Facebook is the default, but my goodness, the amount of information that can be extracted just from Facebook, or just for any social media, is astounding. Not to sound too much like Ron Swanson, and then I just want to go run and live in a cabin out in the woods someplace with no internet. But Councilman, I think that's the main concern, is to you get what you paid for, and if you are going to be using an online video conferencing, read the fine print on that. Like I said, we at KLC use Zoom, and it's worked out well to this point. Obviously, I'm sure that this will spawn, down the road, a lot more different software suites. But as far as just anecdotally from our use of Zoom, we've had no issues with it.
And I will add, part of the reason, my understanding, is that we haven't had as many problems with Zoom as have been advertised by other, I should say, agencies, has been that Cassie Cooper and Soraya Shalish have done a lot of research on ways to avoid these issues. So I am throwing Cassie right under the bus. You are free to contact her, and she will be more than happy to help you and let you know about the steps that she's taken to do this. I don't know these steps. I'm not that tech savvy. So our next question, and I just got a text from Cassie. I'm sure she's thrilled. Craig Bowman from Villa Hills. If we can't hold public hearings, how do we meet the requirements under statute for municipal road aid and property tax rate setting? In one of the governor's previous orders, he also stated, well, it was in the 325 order as well, the one that restricts or suspends any in-person government activity unless it's necessary to promote or sustain life. In that one, there's one of the kind of catch-alls is that any time limit, any deadline, there's the word I'm looking for, any deadline, any statute that requires that certain things be accomplished by a given deadline are suspended if they would require violation of the any of his orders, including the social distancing, including the suspension of in-person government activities unless necessary to, protect or sustain life. So you can fall back on that for a lot of these, and, just the general suspension statute. The reason we focused on planning and zoning and code enforcement is that there are a lot of specific time limits where there's a presumption of approval based upon those time limits. So I'm going to let Chris talk a little bit more in depth about the municipal road aid in particular.
Yeah, and Morgan's absolutely right that those are told with that. And if you look at the the requirements for those, if it's like the vast majority of cities that I've spoken to in the 6 years I've been at KLC that have these types of hearings, it's kind of like the class you had in college with the 5-minute rule for the professor to show up. You advertise it, nobody shows up, and then you move on to your business. I have spoken to 1 or 2 cities. I think Prestonsburg, Mayor Stapleton, as part of they did an online meeting. It's either this week or it may have been towards the end of last week on Zoom. And, they normally had, 5 or 10 folks show up to their, in-person meetings, and with Zoom, I guess the minimum they, felt okay with it. They noticed the public hearing as they always, would, and just followed all the meeting requirements under the new allowances by statute and the attorney general's guidance to say, if you want to participate, here's how you get on Zoom to do that. I think that's acceptable. I think that's something you can do under that. But again, this is it's one of these deals currently to where we're talking a lot in theory. Once our cities kind of get your feet wet and see how it works, this is my 3rd or 4th Zoom teleconference in Soraya. God love her. I mean, the first one I did, I thought she was going to have to peel me off the ceiling because none of it made sense. I felt like every button had like a please do not touch this or it's all going to explode. There's a comfort level with this. It went from, the first one felt like I was talking into, the abyss, to where this feels more like a Sunday school meeting. I'm here with a bunch of friends, and, I normally talk to myself as it is, so this isn't that much different. It's just a comfort level, and our cities are going to have to figure out what works best for them. But I do think over and above the fact, as Morgan said, that under the guidance from the state that these deadlines are on hold, that I do think this is one area to where because it's normally not something you've got a whole lot of folks show up, at least based anecdotally on my conversations with cities over the years, that you may want to look at noticing it before 30 minutes before your next Zoom regular meeting, just to see how that plays out, or reach out. Goodness knows Mayor Stapleton loves talking to people, so you may just want to reach out to Prestonsburg directly to find out how that worked for him as well. So that's all I have on that.
Okay, and we have a question from Councilmember Ford Benningfield. Since you have discussed the importance of open records, our city council members, sorry, it's moving on me. Our city council members are still currently using our own emails and do not have city issued email addresses for city business. It's my understanding that it's in the best interest for our cities to have, or for our city, that we have city issued email addresses. Your thoughts? Honestly, what we suggest in all of our open records presentations, and when we talk about social media and the First Amendment and records retention generally, our suggestion is if you don't have a city address, go on Hotmail and get one that says Ford Benningfield council member @gmail.com and have a dedicated email for free on Gmail, on Hotmail, whatever resource, Yahoo, whatever you're comfortable with. AOL, I still see those occasionally. Have a dedicated email for your city business. That's our primary suggestion. Whether the city can afford or it should be in the best interest to have a separate email address given to you by the city, that's really a policy consideration. It may be a financial consideration as well for the city. Under open records, each individual member of the legislative body is their own open records custodian, is their own record keeper, is their own agency, essentially, under the act. So it's still their responsibility to maintain the records and produce them. Obviously, for the city, for city records, the custodian is the city clerk. But for legislative body members, that's going to be, unfortunately, that they're the ones who are the possessors, the keepers of their own records. So I really don't have an opinion on whether the city should or should not issue an email address. Chris?
Yeah, I agree. This is one area I feel very strongly that, yes, the city doesn't necessarily have to issue that email address to you, but if you don't have a dedicated and segregated email account for all your city business or all your public business that you're conducting, it's incumbent that you do that, because you're just protecting yourself. Because again, as I said, we all have that one citizen in your community who would love nothing better than to just find as much dirty laundry as to, and it could be on anything. But if you are mixing, business with your private life, you need to realize, and I'll just put it this way: are you comfortable with how you have your email set up that a judge can separate the wheat from the chaff as far as what is public and what is private? And especially, we become friends with the people we work with, and you may send something that may have been about cussing John Calipari for a coaching decision he made in the game the night before, but you send it to another council member. Are you willing to open yourself up like that? But if you keep it separated to where you're only discussing city business on this one account, I think it's just smart business. I mean, I'm a huge believer in common sense, and I think it just makes common sense to do that.
Okay, next question from one of my favorite people ever is from Stephanie Settles in Paris. Our bid openings are open to the public. What advice do you have to handle current bid openings? Right now, our suggestion is consistent with everything we've said before, which is you can open them on Zoom meetings. You can provide the public with a link where they can see and hear the bid opening and move forward from there. The other thing to recall is that the governor's order does suspend any statutory requirements. So if you're operating under 45A, what have you, then that can be suspended periodically or temporarily until the next meeting if that's what you need to do as well. However, generally what we recommend is doing the video teleconference and opening it that way. Chris?
Yeah, I think, and I'm trying to refresh my own recollection here. I think Paris may be model procurement, which it's a little bit different analysis, because under general bidding, your default provisions, there's no requirement that the bids be opened in public. But obviously, if a city is adopted by ordinance or something like that, a requirement, that's something to keep in mind. But again, hopefully, now that we're kind of through the first tsunami tidal wave here, as far of getting our feet back under us, there should be ways to do this under Zoom video conferencing or the allowances that have been extended by the governor and by the legislature and by the attorney general to figure out a way that this can be done in a proper manner. And we're happy to. I mean, I'm always happy to spitball with the city attorney or a mayor or anything. I've gotten pretty good about whittling square pegs down to a round hole over the years. So, if we need to talk specifics, just give me a shout. I'm happy to kind of try to figure out the best way to skin this cat if we have to.
Okay, our next question is from Laura Basham, the city clerk from, sorry, I just completely whiffed, Hawesville. Sorry, Laura. We've talked several times. Dang it. Should we be having a meeting to pass our new budget? The budget process, I have some good news. The budget process I should say, I started that out poorly, I apologize. For budgetary purposes, the city doesn't necessarily have to pass a new budget. You can operate on a continuation budget if necessary. If you are going to, or if there's a need to work on the budget to pass it before July, then video teleconferencing, you can always use those tools. If there's something you need to do and it's technologically impossible, or I say impossible, technologically not feasible to conduct your meeting by video teleconference and you need to do audio teleconference, you can and pass the budget that way. It's really up to whether the city can continue to operate on that previous year's budget, that continuation budget, or whether you need to amend and move forward now.
And I agree with that. And frankly, I think the 80 attendees on this call would be shocked by some of the cities that have been operating under the same budget since I think the Roosevelt administration. So it's not unheard of to have to roll that or choose to roll that over from year to year. But again, I'm choosing to be optimistic here. I do think that with the abilities given to us by the governor, by the General Assembly, by the Attorney General, we can do this. I think it's feasible. It's just a matter of getting the comfort level up to do that. I'm on a board of Central Kentucky Writing for Hope, which is an equine therapy group here in Central Kentucky. And we had a board meeting a couple of weeks ago by phone. Was it ideal? No. Did it take 3 times longer than usual? Yes. But we had another one shortly thereafter to discuss something. It goes much smoother. It's like anything else. None of us do anything perfectly the first time. And frankly, as city officials and city employees and city non-elected officers, we're always learning. And this is, the fact, and frankly, I think it's amazing. And I'm so proud to be a part of KLC and a part of local government that we're sitting here, less than a month into this pandemic with 80 elected officials and city officials from around the state, with me sitting at my dining room table, being able to drill down and figure out how the thunder we're going to do this. But we're going to do this. We are. And it's a matter of time. And, you've got through the end of the fiscal year to figure out the budget. We'll figure it out. And once you have this video conference or teleconference, you figure out what's going to work. Then it's just a matter of slapping it together and getting it passed. But we'll get it figured out. And if you don't do it by June 30th and the first of the year, fiscal year, and it's August 1 and everything's back to normal and we're ready for football season to start, then, you just adjust the numbers once you pass that budget. So, if this is the biggest problem you're worried about down there that Mayor King is concerned about down there in Hawesville, you all are doing fine. We're going to figure this out. And Laura, you know where to find me if you need me.
All right. And, Chris said that he was at his dining room table. Any of y'all who have watched these may notice that I have a different background today. That's because to avoid the interruptions from my husband, my dogs, every other interruption I've had, I have been evicted from the dining room table and am now in the spare bedroom. So the next one is, the next question is from Parkway Village and Commissioner Evans. So should we notice the public that we are postponing or not having the public hearings for road aid? It is our suggestion, if you have not already advertised that you are having a hearing on a certain date or what have you, you're not required to, but as much communication as we can give to our constituents, our citizens, I think the better when this is all over and we're all back to business as usual. I know that I have been doing everything, or we as a whole, KLC, we've been doing everything we can to reach out to our cities to see if there's anything we can do to help y'all. And we do that because we love our cities and, you know, we want to help. So I know that any additional information you can provide the public, any information that you can give them is helpful. If it hasn't previously been noticed, it's not necessarily a requirement though.
I agree 100% with Morgan on that, and not necessarily for the road aid meetings, but there was a conversation amongst a lot of our city attorneys statewide about canceling a regular meeting that was scheduled. And again, this was a week or two ago, and the facts on the ground have changed a lot since then. But consistently, and frankly, I think I've spoken to several people, you know, who are on this web conference, webinar, whatever you want to call it, that, you know, if you wake up the day of your regular scheduled meeting and there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, what have y'all done? You've canceled the meeting. You know, so yes, the statute expressly states under 83A 130 for mayor council, 140 for commission, and 150 for city manager form of government that you shall have a monthly meeting. But, you know, that's, and frankly, what one of the city attorneys pointed out is, you know, the health, safety, and welfare of your citizens is incumbent. And there's going to be there's room for common sense here. And it's not uncommon at all, even before the pandemic, for whatever reason. I've had several cancel for UK basketball games that will reschedule for a special meeting later in the month. But when you do that, you know, especially in this situation, if it's for road aid, if it's for your regular meeting, I do think that you need to, you know, at least post something at City Hall. I think, you know, you want to use the magical words of health, safety, and welfare of our citizens being, you know, the greatest job that a city government has in order to protect you all under all guidance from federal, state, local levels. We're going to postpone this until a later date. And obviously, if you have that one local newspaper, radio station, media person that's at every meeting, let them know. So far, I haven't heard any city that this is boomeranged on. Frankly, the feedback I've gotten is that your citizens have been, you know, mindful and grateful that you all have taken the steps to protect them by doing this. But it would just be common sense. Frankly, my thoughts on it is that, you know, the same way you would notice a special meeting, you need to probably let folks know, especially if you know somebody absolutely 100% was going to, you know, be showing up with a pitchfork and a torch at the meeting, you know, let them know, or just whoever would normally be showing up. But that's just, again, these are just general guidelines. There's nothing really statutory on that.
Okay, our next question is also from Commissioner Evans. We copy all city email to the city's account, so our city related messages are available through that account. Is that sufficient? If you mean, is that sufficient to separate it out for open records, your general account is still going to be, if there were not, your general account, if there were ever a lawsuit, would still potentially be subject to review. However, as long as you, as the custodian of your records, are can say clearly that any city business, any emails, anything pertaining to city business was forwarded to X, Y, or Z account, and that's the, you know, the best record of mine as Commissioner Evans. That's the best account of my records, and they're being kept according to the records retention schedule from libraries and archives, and, you know, you can verify that, then that's going to be adequate for open records purposes.
Yeah, I agree with that, because it's not the individual elected official is considered a public agency pursuant to the open records law. So even though you you know, have forwarded all that to the central server where all that is kept, the law, frankly, you know, suggests that you know, the open records request would be made individually, specifically upon you as an elected official. And as Morgan correctly pointed out, that, at that point, you're going to have to make the showing that, all city business was in fact forwarded on, and that's all I have. So that's again, just a judgment call you'd have to make. Let me text Morgan to let her know that her audio's.
Sorry, I'm sure I looked really animated while I was reading this, didn't I? Yeah. Thanks. So we're going to try again from Joseph Robinson. Our issue here is that we have 2 of our 4 commissioners who are not computer literate and do not own computers and have no interest in getting a computer. With that being said, we cannot have Zoom meetings from our homes because all commissioners will not be able to attend. We do have a lady that has her own news channel via Facebook, and she said that she can televise our meetings live on her news channel if we want to continue to hold our meetings at City Hall. And she will come set up at City Hall and televise live, and we can take text questions via phone and answer them live. Would this be sufficient? In these situations, our suggestion would be to have a single individual on the video teleconference and have other members attend by conference call. This is one of the situations where it's not technologically feasible or available for you to conduct a video teleconference with all your legislative body members. So if business needs to be conducted and you want to have it by audio teleconference, then one of the easiest ways we've seen to allow the public to hear what's going on would be to have somebody on video, and perhaps the lady with a news channel, she could stream that Facebook Live. You could have them participating, one individual who can be seen by video, and as long as the public can hear everything going on, then that's going to be adequate under Senate Bill 150. In the meeting notice, where you would give the special called meeting notice, like it said in the Attorney General's opinion that Chris discussed earlier in this webinar, and in the meeting notice where it says location, you would give the Facebook channel or Facebook link. Some cities are using a YouTube channel, others maybe even a public broadcasting station. However that works, that would be where the public can see and hear, or in this case, just hear, and that would be adequate. So those are the tools that are available to avoid having in-person meetings, potentially in violation of the governor's order. Chris, did I miss anything?
I think so. And as sitting here, I got an email from Craig Bowman, and Craig, I think this may answer your question as well, because first of all, I mean, it's great to try to involve all your elected officials, but for whatever reason, technological reasons, whatever, you still have to have a quorum present to conduct business. So as long as you can get a quorum there, that's sort of the initial step with that. So, but if you're wanting to involve everyone, I think based upon how this has been explained, and we're going to start shaking your head, viciously if I'm off base on this, is that if you have some that are attending by video conference and some that are attending by audio conference, I think you would need to notice that as an audio conference, because you kind of need to look at the, I hesitate to say lowest common denominator, but everyone is going to be heard, not everyone is going to be seen. And based upon the guidance from the Attorney General's advisory opinion of the 31st, I'm sorry, I think that would be sufficient. That and as I mentioned when I was initially going over this, when you initially go on the record, it's somewhat similar to when I used to take depositions. You want to at the outset kind of state what we're, why are we here, what are we doing, how are we doing it. That you have commissioners A and B who are participating via audio, and then Commissioner C and D, and then Mayor E are participating, by video conference, and it's being streamed through whatever that third-party website is. That again, that website would need to be listed up on the notice as well. So it's a little bit of a neither fish nor fowl, aspect, but frankly, we're probably going to see more of that. And it's a good question, but I do think that would be in keeping with the statutory guidelines and the administrative guidelines we're getting from the Attorney General.
Hey, look, I found the unmute button this time. Okay, our next question is from Mayor Thomas again. We have a request for a conditional use permit that needs to be advertised for public hearing and heard by the Board of Adjustment. Can we advertise a hearing date with a link to a Zoom meeting? This request was presented prior to all the restrictions, and we were ready to advertise and mail letters to property owners right when all the restrictions started. The citizens would like this item addressed as soon as possible. What do you recommend? So I think we've already had this question under 100-237. Of course, y'all are required to have a hearing for the conditional use permit. Both Senate Bill 150 and the video teleconferencing statutes allow this to be done by video teleconference. However, any testimonial evidence must also be taken by video teleconference. So if the individual who is presenting the permit, if their testimony is going to be put into the record, they're going to have to participate by video teleconference. Anyone who comments or who is going to make a statement or what have you, that will also have to be by video teleconference, and the record will have to be kept that way. So if that's possible, and if you can notice it that way or through those means, then you can do it. Those are pretty much the only recommendations that I would have. If you don't think that that's possible, then you're probably going to have to postpone, because there's no other mechanism by which the statutes allow us to conduct these hearings.
There's probably why I'm not a city attorney, but I mean, hearings get moved all the time. That's one thing lawyers love more than anything, is moving hearings under the circumstances of a global pandemic. And even if and frankly, my default would be, if somebody is on fire to get this passed under these circumstances, you probably want to look at it a little closer anyway. I think you can maybe do your due diligence to look at how feasible it would be to do all this by video conferencing. But for the love of all that is good, unless there is an absolute, like, Godzilla on roller skates coming down Main Street that we absolutely have to have this hearing, or the heavens are going to fall, move it a couple weeks. This is changing. I mentioned earlier that it looked like some of my earlier entries were written in Sanskrit, just because the facts have changed so much just in 3 weeks. If you push it for 2 or 3 weeks, things may be a lot different. I'm not going to say things may be a lot worse, because I'm not willing to think that way. But I think this is one area where if you can push it, surely that might be acceptable. But as Morgan rightly pointed out, you can look at the video conference aspects of that, which frankly, if you do it that way and it doesn't work out perfectly, you guarantee yourself a ground that is going to be argued when it's appealed. So that's my take.
And I have to mention to y'all that we do keep a book of Chris in the municipal law office for all of his sayings, whether they're your average colloquialism or the Godzilla on roller skates is a new one. We love it, love it, love it. The next one is from Shamila Hargett from Olive Hill. We canceled our regular meeting in March and held a special meeting via teleconference for a few items late March. Should we attempt to have a regular meeting and try to take care of normal business? I thought I read something that said meetings were only to be held for life-sustaining or safety purposes. So you're correct that you read that. And like Chris said, every time we think we know something, it changes. So it's really up to the city whether they want to continue to conduct normal business by video teleconferencing. If that is something that the city can do, we want our legislative bodies to be able to meet and to continue city business. You know, it's in the best interest of all of us. If you have to postpone or if you need to cancel, then that is an option during this time. The previous information that you had, that any meetings were only to be held for life-sustaining or life-saving purposes, that was before Senate Bill 150, when we had the audio teleconference included in, you know, temporarily during the state of emergency. What is not preferred is to have in-person meetings of the legislative body. That was the March 25th order from Governor Beshear that we've talked about, where they suspended any in-person government activities unless they were, you know, necessary to promote or sustain life. So that's still in effect. However, we now have these other tools, be it video teleconferencing, or if you can't do it that way, audio teleconference. So we're hoping that our cities can continue to function and continue to meet using these means when y'all need to. Chris, I don't know if you.
Yeah, in Olive Hill, I know your all city attorney well, and I'm always happy to help as far as, you know, what logistically might make the most sense. I think probably knowing some of the elected officials down there, your option is probably going to be by phone, is not necessarily video. But I have no question that you all can make the showing that the phone conference was needed. And again, you just get that on the minutes at the beginning of the meeting as to why we're opting or feel forced to use phone over audio. And it would just be, and frankly, you probably have the capability already through whomever your local phone system is to have a call like that. But I'm happy to talk to your city attorney. I talk to Derek a lot, about once a week, if not more. He's a frequent flyer with the KLC legal assistance plan. So we're always happy to help, and just have him give me a shout. We'll kind of talk through what might make the most sense for you.
Okay, I can't believe this. Y'all have not asked a question in about 90 seconds. So, and we are 3 minutes away from the end. What I would I'm going to go ahead and Chris, if you kind of want to summarize, and then I'll wrap us up.
And again, as I said at the beginning, I mean, I'm amazed that, you know, I'm looking up, we got, you know, 80 participants on this call, doing something that, you know, a month ago that, you know, who would have thought we're going to be here doing this. We're going to get through this. This is going to, don't sound like I'm aping our governor too much, but we are. And I've been at KLC for 6 years. It's the best job I've ever had because of you people, because of the folks on this call, that, you know, it is rare that you see these people this dedicated. On the call earlier this week, you know, the old saying about, you know, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, there's no political parties when it comes to, you know, a pandemic and local government. Everybody's just looking to keep your folks happy and healthy. As I said, if you take nothing else from this call, if you're drafting anything, if you're writing anything, if you're doing anything, health, safety, and welfare. Those are the magic words that are going to get you a long way, because that's what you're doing. You're looking after the health, safety, and welfare of your citizens. If you need me, you can reach me directly at 859-977-3709. That's 859-977-3709. My email is cjohnson, JOHNSON@klc.org. Because if you're anything like me, you're going to get off this call and say, I meant to ask that. So I'll be checking my inbox here in about 5-10 minutes. I'm sure I'm going to have 35 questions to respond to. We are keeping busy, and we're here for you all. And, you always hear people, I think it's really kind of, changed how people feel. They're like, oh man, it'd be so great to work from home. Well, I wish I had a clock to punch. I'm up working earlier and working later than I ever did at KLC. And I worked hard when I was in the office at KLC. But we're here for you guys. I love you all. We're going to get through this. And as I said earlier, happy Easter, happy Passover. If you got family that you're quarantined with, hug them or air hug them, whatever the case may be. And we're here to help. So I'll look forward to talking to y'all in the future.
And I'll just echo what Chris says. I will tell you that I've never been more proud of the people I work with or the agency I work for. It is amazing. And all of our cities are trying so hard. And like Chris said, and the governor said, we are going to get through this. Anything we can do at any time, y'all know you can get in touch with me, Andrea, Courtney, Chris, and we will respond. This has provided more meaning, I think, this work for all of us and brought us all closer together. And we're so grateful for that. And if one more of y'all keeps posting up here about how appreciative you are, I'm going to start tearing up. So happy Easter, and stay home, stay safe, and please let us know if there's anything at all we can do. Thank y'all so much. Call, email. We'll talk to you soon.